This video will review what it means to attend or lean into your group members and truly listen to what it is that they're sharing in a way that helps them to feel safe and comfortable in the group. This type of active listening goes beyond the words used when group members share. It involves listening to the context of the words and the emotions behind them in order to better understand the person's experience. One of the most important parts of being a support group facilitator is to create a feeling of safety in the group. And we do this by communicating authentically with group members and showing that we are paying close attention through nonverbal communication. In fact, in an emotional conversation, only 7% of the meaning of what was said came from the words. If I greet each group with the, "Hi, great to see you again," do you think they would feel welcome and comfortable? Probably not, especially if I'm slouched back in my chair and I have my arms crossed when I say it. But if I change the tone, my pitch, and my body language, I can say the exact same words again, but have a completely different effect. "Hi, great to see you again." All of a sudden, it feels a lot more welcoming. So we attend to those in the group and communicate that we are listening by keeping an open posture and body position and facing the person fully. So rather than having arms crossed and closing ourselves off, we've opened our body position, we're turned towards them, and we may even be leaned in towards them as they're sharing. When appropriate, using gestures like using your hand to gently encourage the person to share or continue sharing, or gently nodding your head can all be encouraging. Just be careful not to overdo this. Sometimes if we over nod or we do too many of those when someone's sharing, then this can end up being more distracting than supportive. So just try to find that balance. Also try to make your face expressive and communicate interest to the person sharing. So one of the things that many of us have gotten quite skilled at during the pandemic has been communicating with that upper portion of our face when wearing a mask. So using our eyebrows more, or squinting our eyes, or making our eyes wide when we're talking. And this really helps to accompany the words that we're sharing. Attending also includes maintaining eye contact. Now, this is a natural level of eye contact, so not staring into the person's soul by any means, but maintaining that level of eye contact that feels natural and comfortable to both of you. You also want to give your undivided attention. So not taking notes or passing the cookies or pulling out a discussion segment when someone's sharing, but rather keeping your focus on the person and leaving all the other stuff for another time. Because in this moment, what the person is sharing is most important and they deserve your full attention. Present yourself authentically. So this means being your genuine self and bringing your own unique personality to the group. Generally speaking, most people feel comfortable being who they are and sharing honestly when they can trust that the person listening is also being who they are. And this can go a long way in building that trust and rapport in a support group. It's also important to be aware of and respectful of cultural differences. For example, more direct eye contact may not be appropriate in certain cultures and could even be seen as intrusive or challenging. And our personal body buffer zones also vary between different cultures. So in North American mainstream culture, this typically means getting no closer than about 1 arm's length from another person, while in some cultures this may be less. Also think about how you are naturally inclined to respond when someone cries. Do you tend to pat their shoulder, give them a hug, or pass them a tissue? In some cases, it may be perfectly appropriate to pass someone a box of tissues when you see them in tears. But in others, it may actually stop the person from going deeper into what it is that they're sharing. So while some people may feel more secure to keep sharing with a tissue in their hand, since it gives them some control over their tears, some others might take this as a sign to stop sharing altogether. Okay, and also consider the setup of your group. Are you all sitting in a close circle where everyone can simply reach the tissue box? Or are you sitting at opposite ends of a large table where you need to rocket the tissue box across the length of the table to get to the other person, which can be very distracting. So in these situations, it can be best to have multiple tissue boxes so everyone in the group is within arm's reach of a tissue if they want one. Okay, let's also think about what happens when you hug someone. So in some situations, it might stop the person from continuing to share their thoughts and feelings. Okay, so some people might simply not be comfortable with a hug, while others might lean into it like a pause at the end of a sentence, and they might not necessarily pick up where they left off. And as a facilitator, think about your own motivations for why you might want to hug a group member. Could it possibly be to satisfy your own needs? For example, if you're feeling sad for the person or perhaps uncomfortable and unsure of how to respond when they're crying, could it be that that hug is to make you feel better in that moment? Okay. Or perhaps you may naturally be a hugger, in which case this is an automatic response on your part. So running through these questions can help you to better understand the purpose of the hug and what the other person's needs are before offering a hug. Okay, and the use of touch is usually more appropriate when reserved for a gentle hand on a shoulder or the arm. So just being aware of these cultural differences will really help you to adapt your interactions with group members so they feel respected and safe in the group. So going back to the environment, think about how different aspects of the environment can affect sharing in the group. So first off, the room should always be private. However, depending on where the room is, there may be some distracting background noise that's occurring outside of the room. Also think about the size of the room in relation to the group size. Okay, so having a small group in a large room can make someone feel on display, or a large group in a small room can make someone feel crowded. And we also have many groups that use tables and others that don't, or those who might use a small table like the one that you see in the photo on the left here on the screen. So there are pros and cons to both using a table or not using it. For example, while having a table is practical, we can, rest our coffee or tea on it or our arms. It also puts up a barrier between people, which may diminish the intensity of the rapport between group members. On the other hand, not having a table may make some people feel vulnerable, and having the table helps them to feel safe to share, knowing that they have that protection to sit behind. If you don't have a watch, consider where you position yourself in the room so you're able to see the clock on the wall if there is one in the room somewhere. So ideally, you wouldn't want to be turning around to keep an eye on the time. So it would be important to sit where you can discreetly glance up at the clock to monitor the time. Also think about when you have refreshments during the group. So some groups may have coffee and tea and cookies from the start, while others may reserve refreshments for a break in the middle of the group. Some people might find it comforting to have their coffee cup or their napkin to hold on to and manipulate during the group, while others might find this distracting. So if you enter a group as a co-facilitator and you think that any of these factors may be impeding the sharing that you're seeing, then it's perfectly okay to try a new setup. I've gone into a group myself that was initially set up with 2 long tables put together end to end. And when I observed everyone sharing, I noticed the group members at one end leaning in quite far to see those at the other end who are sharing. And I myself found it difficult to hear those at the other end who spoke quietly. So I raised this with my co-facilitator and we agreed to try putting the tables side by side at the next group. After this quick change, we immediately noticed a difference in the rapport between group members and the intensity of the sharing because everybody could see and hear each other now. The group members themselves were thrilled with the change, so of course we kept it. It was a small environmental change, but it had such a huge impact on the group. So don't be afraid to try something in a different way if you suspect that something about the environment might be inhibiting the comfort of the space and the sharing of your group members. So we've just covered what it means to attend to somebody in the group, and now we're going to talk a little bit more about active listening. So active listening is a special way of responding to people that lets the person know that you have been listening. It implies a basic acceptance of the person's thoughts and feelings. So when you're actively listening, you're observing the verbal and nonverbal messages that are being shared so you can identify the content and feelings in the story. So this will allow you to demonstrate that you're listening by sharing your understanding of the content and feelings so you can generate an appropriate response and move the conversation forward constructively. It also gives the person the opportunity to correct misunderstandings, and it encourages them to further explore their thoughts and feelings by continuing with their story. So for example, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated that your siblings are not offering to help you with mom and dad. If you've understood them correctly, they may agree and continue on to share more about this frustration that they're feeling. If you've gotten it wrong, this also gives them the chance to explore the feeling in another way. So if you've gotten it wrong, they might say something like, "It's not that I feel frustrated so much as sad that they're missing out on this time with them." So even though you've identified the feeling in the story wrong, you've still unpacked that feeling of grief, and now they can explore this experience more deeply as a group. Now keep in mind that as a facilitator, you are always modeling how to do this with the group members, and they will learn these active listening skills from you. So in a healthy group, other group members will jump in and validate the experiences of one another. So the amount of responding that you need to do personally as a facilitator really depends on how good your group is at being active listeners. So let's look at another example of what it means to actively listen to something that someone has shared. So a group member says, "Often people ask me how my husband is doing." Now I'll say this again, but this time listen to the tone of my voice when I say it. Often people ask me how my husband is doing. So the words are the same, but the tone I use has just changed what I've said. So in the first way, I'm factually stating that people ask about my husband. However, the second time I might actually be saying, "I need to talk about how I am doing," but that invitation is rarely given. It's always about my husband. So this is a very true experience for many caregivers in a support group. They're often very used to talking about the person that they're caring for, but not often asked how they're doing. It's understandable. Few people want to invite the pain or know what to do with it. We know that caregiving is hard. The support group is a space to invite that pain so the group member can have that opportunity to share honestly in the company of others who understand that pain. And being in the presence of others with shared experiences can be very cathartic and help the person to know that they are not alone in this difficult journey. This is an excerpt from the book Relentless Goodbye: Grief and Love in the Shadow of Dementia by Ginny Burkholder. Today, the question I need to hear has shifted to, how are you doing as a caregiver? This question from an emphatic listener helps me to continue to process my reality. It is a difficult question to ask because it invites the sharing of pain and requires the listener to share some of the feelings of helplessness. But when someone can ask, listen, and simply hold the ache with me, the emotional heaviness dissipates. So this is an important excerpt because as a facilitator, our role is to let people tell the stories they need to tell in order to work through the situation that they're in. We do not listen to people's stories in order to fix them. And as much as we may want to have all the answers, we simply can't. Each person's situation is so unique and lived in a different way, and it can also be complex at times. So our role is to hold space for the person, to listen emphatically, and to validate what it is that they need to share so they can better understand their own experience. So the acronym VASE, V-A-S-E, can help us to remember some essential points of attentive and active listening. We can validate or honor the person's experience. This means we don't judge their experience, nor do we need to agree with or accept what we hear as the truth. For example, we may know that a group member has a large family that is heavily involved in the person's care, but if the group member is sharing that they feel that they have no one to help them, then that is their truth of their experience. We can attend to the person by being truly present, listening, and conveying our respect and caring. By doing this, we invite the person to speak openly about their experience. We can leave room for silence to allow the person and the group to reflect, or to tell us more about what is happening for them in their own time. So you might do this by pausing before responding to something that has just been shared. You might also introduce the silence to the group if you feel that there's a need for a deeper reflection. For example, let's take a moment to think about what Mary shared and how this resonates with your own situation. Lastly, we use empathy to understand what the person's experience is like from their point of view by walking in their shoes. So just some notes about feelings. We all have them and we've all learned to manage them in different ways. As a facilitator, it's important to be on the same page about why it's important to listen to the feelings behind what someone shares, just as much, if not more so, than the words being used. So everyone has a right to their feelings, and the feelings always make sense for the person. Okay? So feelings are neither good nor bad, they just are. And while feelings are not dangerous, actions can be. So this is an important one because as a facilitator, you may hear some things and question if it's just a feeling or if they're serious about what it is they're sharing. So for example, you might hear someone share something like, "This whole situation is just all their fault." So they may feel that way because they're burnt out or they're grieving, not necessarily because they think that whatever is occurring is truly the person's fault. Okay? Denying these feelings will not make them go away, but exploring them, as we do in the support group, gives the person the chance to identify where those feelings might be coming from so they can better understand them and also know that these feelings will not last forever. So these are the four most common categories of feelings: anger, sadness, happiness or feeling glad, and fear or feeling afraid. And each category of feelings has varying levels of intensity, from mild at the bottom of the table all the way up to severe at the top of the table. So when you're responding in a group, try starting at the bottom of the table and letting the person who is sharing correct you if they are feeling a greater level of intensity. So for example, if you respond with, "It sounds like you're feeling quite unhappy with how things are going with your dad," the person sharing might correct you to escalate the feeling and say something like, "Unhappy? No, I'm completely crushed. I feel so hopeless." Now let's think about why we would want to start at the bottom of the scale and let the person correct us as opposed to starting at the top. How might starting at the top of the scale impact how they feel about their own story? So if we start at the top, we risk escalating their own interpretation of their experience. So perhaps they came to the group that day feeling a little worried about moving their mom into care, and we say to them, "It sounds like you're terrified about the transition next week." They might stop to think, "Should I be?" Or perhaps they're feeling some relief at their mom going into care, and we say, "You must be elated to have that time to yourself again." If they're not already feeling this way, they may start to feel guilty about feeling any positive feeling at all, because relief and elation are two entirely different things. However, if you said, "You must feel relieved," and they correct you and say, "I'm more than relieved, I'm elated to finally be able to be a daughter again," then you have reduced the risk of shifting their understanding of their experience into a more challenging direction. So always start at the bottom and leave the high intensity feelings for their clarification. This brings us to the end of this video on attending and active listening. If you have additional questions about applying these skills to your role, please speak with your staff supervisor. Thank you.